The morning sun cast long shadows across the San Francisco sidewalks as Thomas Miller huddled under his worn jacket. At 42, with graying stubble and tired eyes that still held a spark of intelligence, Thomas hadn't imagined this would be his life. Just 8 months ago, he had been a software engineer with a steady job, an apartment with a view of the bay, and plans for the future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. First came the company layoffs, budget cuts, they said, then the medical bills after his mother's stroke. By the time he had drained his savings to help with her care, the tech industry had tightened its belt and jobs were scarce. One missed rent payment became 2, then 3, and before he knew it, Thomas found himself with nothing but a backpack of belongings and nowhere to call home. Thomas wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. Each morning he would wash up in a public restroom, straighten his clothes as best he could, and head to the library to use the computers for job searches. But with no permanent address and growing gaps in his resume, callbacks were rare, and successful interviews even rarer. This particular Tuesday, Thomas had decided to try a different spot. He'd heard from other folks on the street that a popular coffee shop in the downtown area was frequented by tech executives. Not that he planned to bother anyone, Thomas had too much pride for that, but maybe, just maybe, being in proximity to the industry might spark an opportunity. The coffee shop, with its sleek glass exterior and artisanal menu board, stood like a beacon of the world Thomas once belonged to. He positioned himself nearby, not too close to disturb customers, but visible enough should anyone take notice. From his backpack, he pulled out a dog-eared copy of Advanced Machine Learning Techniques, a book he'd rescued from a free box outside a bookstore. Reading helped him stay sharp and, more importantly, helped him feel human. Thomas had been sitting there for about 2 hours, engrossed in his book despite the gnawing hunger in his stomach, when a sleek Tesla pulled up to the curb. He didn't look up immediately, accustomed to the comings and goings of luxury vehicles in this part of town. It was only when he heard a familiar voice, one he'd heard countless times in tech conference videos and news clips, that his attention snapped to the car. Elon Musk stepped out, looking casual in a dark t-shirt and jeans, already deep in conversation with 2 professionally dressed assistants who flanked him like satellites. Thomas couldn't believe his eyes. He'd followed Musk's career for years, admired his drive, his vision, his willingness to take risks that others deemed impossible. The prototype needs to be ready by Thursday, not next week, Musk was saying as they walked toward the coffee shop entrance. We're losing valuable testing time with these delays. One of the assistants, a man with rimless glasses and a tablet clutched to his chest, nodded vigorously. I'll have the team work around the clock if needed, sir. Thomas watched them approach, his heart suddenly racing. He hadn't planned to speak to anyone today, let alone Elon Musk. But something about this chance encounter felt significant, like the universe was offering a rare alignment of stars. Before he could overthink it, Thomas found himself standing up, his worn sneakers planted firmly on the sidewalk. What happened next wasn't planned. Thomas had always been proud, had always believed in earning his way. But 8 months of closed doors, of systems designed to keep people like him down, of nights spent shivering in doorways while the world moved on without him. It had worn away at that pride, leaving something raw and desperate in its place. Excuse me, Thomas called out, his voice steadier than he felt. Mr. Musk? The trio paused. The assistants exchanged glances, clearly annoyed at the interruption. One of them moved slightly in front of Musk, a subtle but clear barrier. Sir, we're running late for your meeting, the assistant said to Musk, while giving Thomas a dismissive look. But Musk had already turned, his gaze landing directly on Thomas. There was a moment of silent assessment, Musk's eyes taking in Thomas's worn clothes, his backpack, the book still clutched in his hand. Thomas swallowed hard. He hadn't begged before. Not once in these 8 difficult months. He'd accepted donated meals, slept in shelters when space was available, but he'd never directly asked a stranger for money. Until now. Can you give me $1? The words tumbled out before he could reconsider, simple and direct. A small crowd of coffee shop patrons had started to notice the interaction, a few people slowing their pace or pausing their conversations to watch. Someone whispered, "Is that Elon Musk?" Another person already had their phone out, camera pointed in their direction. The first assistant cleared his throat. "Sir, we really should—" But Musk held up a hand, silencing him without taking his eyes off Thomas. The world seemed to pause in that moment, the busy street fading to background noise as Thomas stood face to face with one of the richest men on the planet, asking for a single dollar. Thomas could feel his cheeks burning with shame. This wasn't who he was. He wasn't just another faceless beggar on the street. He was Thomas Miller, who had graduated with honors, who had once led development teams, who had dreams and skills and worth. But hunger and desperation had a way of stripping away those identities, leaving only the most basic of human needs. What Thomas didn't expect was for Musk to actually see him, not just look at him, but really see him. Most people's eyes skimmed over the homeless, a self-protective reflex that allowed them to navigate urban spaces without confronting uncomfortable truths about inequality and human suffering. "What's your name?" Musk asked, his tone neutral but not unkind. The question caught Thomas off guard. He'd expected to be ignored, or maybe handed a dollar with the mechanical efficiency of someone dropping coins in a vending machine. Not this, not genuine engagement. "Thomas," he answered, then added, "Thomas Miller," as if reclaiming his full identity in that moment. "And what's that you're reading, Thomas?" Musk nodded toward the book that Thomas was still holding. Thomas glanced down at the book in his hands as if he'd forgotten it was there. "Oh, it's on machine learning. I was trying to stay current with—" He trailed off, suddenly aware of how strange this conversation must seem to onlookers. Musk's eyebrows raised slightly, interest flickering across his face. By now, the small crowd of onlookers had grown, several people openly filming with their phones. The second assistant leaned in to whisper something to Musk, probably another reminder about their schedule, but Musk shook his head slightly. "You know about machine learning?" Musk asked. Thomas straightened his posture slightly. "Yes, sir. I was a software engineer before." He gestured vaguely at himself, at his current circumstances, words failing him. A woman exiting the coffee shop slowed her pace to watch, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. A business-suited man nearly walked into a lamppost, his attention captured by the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. It was a strange tableau, the billionaire innovator and the homeless man, engaged in conversation on a busy San Francisco street, as the morning hustle of one of the world's tech capitals flowed around them like a river around two stones. Thomas wasn't sure what he had expected when he'd called out to Musk, but it certainly wasn't this moment of genuine human connection. Perhaps just a dollar, handed over with minimum eye contact, or more likely to be completely ignored. But not this curious attention, not these questions that treated him like a person worth talking to. Little did Thomas know that this simple request, "Can you give me $1?" would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would stun not just the growing crowd of onlookers, but eventually millions of people online. Little did he know that Elon Musk's response would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine, as he stood there on that San Francisco sidewalk, heart pounding, waiting to see what would happen next. The growing crowd watched in stunned silence as Elon Musk stood face to face with Thomas on that busy San Francisco sidewalk. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither man spoke. Thomas felt his confidence wavering under Musk's intense gaze. He'd made a mistake. He should never have called out to him. "So you were a software engineer," Musk finally said, more statement than question. His voice carried that distinct South African accent that Thomas had heard so many times in interviews and TED Talks. "What happened?" The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard. Most people politely avoided asking how someone ended up on the streets, as if homelessness were contagious through conversation. But Musk's question held no judgment, just plain curiosity. "Life happened," Thomas said with a small shrug. Then, surprising himself, he continued, "Company downsized. Then my mom got sick, stroke. Medical bills piled up. By the time I could look for work again, the job market had dried up. No permanent address makes it hard to get interviews." He hadn't meant to share so much, but there was something disarming about being truly seen after months of invisibility. Musk nodded slowly, taking in the information. The male assistant checked his watch pointedly, but Musk ignored him. "What was your specialty?" Musk asked. "Machine learning applications for predictive maintenance systems," Thomas replied, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so long. "I was working on algorithms that could predict when factory equipment would fail before it actually happened." At this, Musk's eyebrows rose slightly. His interest seemed genuinely piqued. "Sir," the female assistant interjected, "the investors are waiting." Musk held up one finger, signaling for her to wait. "And what would you do with the dollar if I gave it to you?" he asked Thomas. It was such a simple question, but Thomas hesitated. The truth seemed too small, too ordinary for this extraordinary moment. But he'd come this far with honesty. "There's a coding workshop across town this afternoon," Thomas explained. "Free admission, but I need bus fare to get there. I've been saving coins, but I'm still short." "A coding workshop?" Musk repeated, looking somewhat surprised. "You're still trying to keep your skills current?" Thomas nodded. "Just because I'm down doesn't mean I'm out," he said, then immediately felt foolish for the cliché. But Musk didn't seem to mind. A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. By now, the crowd of onlookers had grown considerably. Phones were raised all around them, recording the unexpected interaction. Someone whispered, "Is he actually talking to a homeless guy?" Another voice replied, "That's Elon Musk for you." Never predictable. Musk reached into his pocket and Thomas braced himself for the dollar bill he'd requested. Instead, Musk pulled out his phone. "What's your full name again?" he asked. "Thomas Miller," he repeated, confusion evident in his voice. Musk typed something into his phone, then looked back up at Thomas. "Machine learning for predictive maintenance, you said?" Thomas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "What was happening?" "We're working on something similar for our manufacturing lines," Musk said. "Always looking for people who understand both the theory and practical applications." The male assistant's eyes widened in alarm. "Mr. Musk, I'm thinking, Richard." "That's exactly what I'm doing," Musk interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. He turned his attention back to Thomas. "When was the last time you coded anything substantial?" Thomas thought for a moment. 3 months ago. The library has computers with limited internet access. I've been working on some open source projects when I can." A woman in the crowd nudged her friend. "Is he offering him a job?" She whispered loudly enough for Thomas to hear. The idea seemed so absurd that Thomas almost wanted to laugh. People like him didn't get jobs from sidewalk conversations with billionaires. That wasn't how the world worked. Musk was silent for a moment, studying Thomas with that same intense focus he was known for directing at technical problems. Then he seemed to make a decision. "Look, a dollar isn't going to solve your problems," Musk said bluntly. "And that workshop, while admirable, isn't going to get you off the street." Thomas felt his heart sink. The brief moment of being treated as an equal, of being seen as Thomas the engineer rather than Thomas the homeless man, was ending. He nodded, ready to thank Musk for his time and retreat back to his spot on the sidewalk. But Musk wasn't finished. "What you need is an opportunity," he continued. "And as it happens, I'm in a position to provide that." Thomas blinked, certain he had misheard. The crowd around them had grown so quiet that the ambient street noise seemed to fade away. "I don't understand," Thomas said slowly. Musk turned to his female assistant. "Lisa, what's the status on that coding rehabilitation program we discussed last quarter?" Lisa looked startled but quickly composed herself. "The framework is in place, sir, but we haven't officially launched yet. We're still finalizing partners for the housing component." "Well, now we have our first candidate," Musk said with a decisive nod. He turned back to Thomas. "It's not charity. It's an investment in human potential. We've been developing a program for skilled workers who've fallen through the cracks. Temporary housing, resources to get back on your feet, and most importantly, a chance to prove your skills." Thomas felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. They happened in movies and feel-good viral videos, not to people like him on random Tuesday mornings. "I don't want a handout," Thomas said cautiously. "Good," Musk replied with a hint of a smile. "Because I don't give handouts. I expect results. This is a business decision, not philanthropy. Your background is relevant to projects we're working on. If you deliver, great. If not, at least you'll have had a fighting chance." The crowd, which had been holding a collective breath, broke into murmurs. The number of phones recording the interaction had multiplied. "This is insane," Thomas whispered, more to himself than to Musk. "Most worthwhile things are at first glance," Musk replied. He turned to Richard. "Get him set up with temporary credentials and bring him to the office this afternoon. Find him some appropriate clothes. We'll handle the details from there." Richard looked like he wanted to protest but thought better of it. Yes, sir, he said, his professional demeanor returning. Lisa stepped forward, handing Thomas a business card. My number's on there. Richard will help you get what you need for today, and I'll be your point of contact going forward. Thomas accepted the card with trembling fingers, staring at the embossed logo as if it might dissolve into thin air. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. I won't waste this chance, Musk nodded once, decisively. I know you won't. People rarely do when they've seen both sides of the coin. He checked his watch. I actually am late now. Richard will handle the logistics. And with that, Elon Musk continued his walk to the coffee shop, the crowd parting before him like water. Several people were already furiously typing on their phones, no doubt sharing what they'd just witnessed across social media. Richard, looking slightly shell-shocked, turned to Thomas. Well, Mr. Miller, he said, his earlier dismissiveness replaced with cautious professionalism. It seems we have some arrangements to make. Are you ready to come with me? Thomas looked down at his worn clothes, his scuffed backpack containing everything he owned in the world. 8 months ago, he'd been an engineer with prospects. 8 minutes ago, he'd been a homeless man asking for $1. And now he was taking the first step on a journey he couldn't have imagined when he woke up that morning, all because he'd found the courage to ask for something small, and in return had been offered something immeasurably larger. Yes, Thomas said with newfound determination. I'm ready. As Richard led him toward the waiting Tesla, Thomas could hear the buzz of excitement from the crowd behind them. Someone called out, "Did that really just happen?" Indeed it had. And this was just the beginning. The Tesla glided silently through the streets of San Francisco, carrying Thomas toward a future he couldn't have imagined when he woke up that morning. He sat stiffly in the back seat, acutely aware of his worn clothes and the faint odor that clung to them despite his best efforts to stay clean. Richard drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Thomas in the rearview mirror with an expression that mixed curiosity and lingering skepticism. So, Richard finally said, breaking the awkward silence, machine learning for predictive maintenance? Thomas nodded, his fingers nervously tracing the embossed logo on Lisa's business card. It was my focus for nearly 4 years. And you've been homeless for 8 months, Thomas supplied. The word homeless still felt strange coming from his own mouth, like admitting to a disease or a crime. But I've been trying to stay current, reading when I can. Using library computers. Richard made a non-committal sound. Thomas couldn't tell if it was doubt or just acknowledgement. Where are we going? Thomas asked after another stretch of silence. First, to get you presentable, Richard replied, checking his phone at a stoplight. Mr. Musk texted. He wants you at the afternoon engineering briefing. Thomas's heart skipped. Today? But I don't have them. That's why we're making a stop first, Richard interrupted, turning the car onto a tree-lined street with upscale boutiques. Mr. Musk doesn't waste time once he makes a decision. 20 minutes later, Thomas stood in a private dressing room of a men's clothing store, staring at his reflection in shock. The store attendant had been professional and discreet, taking his measurements without comment on his disheveled state. Now dressed in charcoal slacks, a blue button-down shirt, and a tailored blazer, Thomas barely recognized himself. We'll take all of this, Richard told the attendant, and he'll wear it out. Plus the other items we selected. Thomas's mouth went dry. I can't accept all this. It's too much. Richard raised an eyebrow. It's an investment, not charity, remember? Mr. Musk was clear about that. Next came a barber shop where Thomas's unruly beard was trimmed and his hair cut and styled. With each transformation, Thomas felt layers of his identity as a homeless man being stripped away, revealing glimpses of his former self. One more stop, Richard announced as they left the barber shop. We need to set you up with temporary accommodations. They pulled up to a modest but clean apartment building. The unit Richard showed him to was small but furnished. A studio with basic amenities, fresh linens, and a stocked refrigerator. This is part of the company's temporary housing program, Richard explained. You can stay here for up to 2 months while you get on your feet. Rent comes out of your earnings once you start. Thomas stood in the center of the apartment, overwhelmed. This is really happening, isn't it? For the first time, Richard's professional demeanor softened slightly. Mr. Musk sees potential in unexpected places. It's why he's who he is. But I should warn you, he has incredibly high standards. This opportunity isn't a guarantee. You'll have to prove yourself, Thomas nodded firmly. I understand, and I'm grateful for the chance. Good. Richard checked his watch. You have 40 minutes to shower and get ready. I'll wait downstairs. Alone in the apartment, Thomas moved in a daze. The hot shower, his first in weeks, felt like a miracle. Clean clothes. A roof, a chance. It was almost too much to process. As he dressed, a notification sound came from the smartphone Richard had given him, for work purposes. It was an email confirming his temporary credentials and security clearance. This was real. This was happening. Downstairs, a freshly showered, shaved, and dressed Thomas emerged to find Richard waiting by the car. The assistant did a double take, clearly surprised by the transformation. Ready? Richard asked. Thomas took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The company complex was smaller than Thomas had expected. Not the massive headquarters he'd seen in news reports, but a satellite office focused on specialized projects. As they walked through security, Thomas felt the weight of curious stares. Word had clearly spread. People are looking at me, Thomas whispered to Richard. The video is already going viral, Richard replied, showing him his phone screen. There it was, Thomas, disheveled and desperate, talking to Elon Musk on the street. The video had over 200,000 views already, with comments flooding in. Oh God, Thomas murmured. Focus, Richard advised, pocketing his phone. That's noise. What matters is what happens in this building. They stopped outside a conference room where several people were already gathered. Through the glass, Thomas could see Musk at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. He's really here, Thomas said, surprised. He splits his time between companies, Richard explained. We got lucky, or you did. This is a project he's particularly interested in. Richard opened the door and the conversation inside immediately stopped. All eyes turned to them, no, to Thomas. Musk looked up from his tablet. Ah, there he is, Musk said, as casually as if Thomas had always been expected at this meeting. Everyone, this is Thomas Miller. Thomas, meet part of the team working on our predictive maintenance systems. Thomas managed a nod, his throat suddenly dry. The others around the table, 5 men and women in similar business casual attire, regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Thomas has relevant experience in this exact field, Musk continued. He'll be joining the team as part of our new rehabilitation program. I expect you all to bring him up to speed. He gestured to an empty chair. Sit. We were just discussing the failure rates in the new press line. Thomas sat feeling like an imposter. A woman across the table, her badge identified her as Dr. Chen, lead engineer, slid a tablet toward him. We're looking at anomalous pressure readings from the hydraulic systems, she said, her tone professional but cautious. The current algorithms aren't catching the patterns early enough. Thomas looked at the data on the screen, forcing his brain to shift gears from survival mode to engineering mode. The numbers, charts, and diagrams were a language he had once been fluent in. He scanned the information, looking for patterns, correlations. You're only monitoring at 10-second intervals, he noted, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. For hydraulic systems of this size, you'd get better predictive results with continuous monitoring and a rolling average algorithm. A brief silence fell over the room. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. That would generate 5 times the data. Volume, someone pointed out. Yes, Thomas agreed, warming to the familiar territory of technical discussion. But you could implement edge processing to filter the noise and only transmit significant pattern shifts. Dr. Chen studied him with new interest. We considered that, but the processing overhead could be offset by using dedicated chips at each sensor point, Thomas finished. It's a solution I worked on at my previous company. The ROI was substantial even with the added hardware costs. Musk leaned forward, his intense gaze fixed on Thomas. How long would it take you to sketch out that approach? Thomas thought for a moment. I'd need to understand your current architecture better, but a basic framework? Maybe 2 days. You have one, Musk said with a slight smile. Work with Dr. Chen. If your solution looks promising, we'll fast-track it. And just like that, Thomas was no longer a homeless man who had stumbled into a meeting. He was an engineer with a deadline and a purpose. The meeting continued for another hour, with Thomas occasionally contributing when he felt confident enough. Some team members remained skeptical, others curious. Dr. Chen, to her credit, treated him as she would any new team member, neither with pity nor excessive scrutiny. As the meeting wrapped up, Musk pulled Thomas aside. "Overwhelmed?" he asked directly. Thomas considered lying, then thought better of it. "Completely. But in the best possible way," Musk nodded. "Good, use it. That edge between comfort and panic is where innovation happens." He gestured around the office. "Everyone here is watching to see if my sidewalk recruiting method works out or blows up in my face. What happens next is entirely up to you." With that, Musk was gone, swept away to his next meeting by a waiting assistant. Dr. Chen approached Thomas. "Ready to get started? We've set up a workspace for you." Thomas followed her, aware that he stood at a crossroads. Behind him lay 8 months of struggle and survival. Ahead lay an opportunity that still felt unreal, all because he'd asked for $1. As he settled at his new desk, Thomas opened the tablet and began to read through the project documentation. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't focused on where he would sleep that night or where his next meal would come from. Instead, it raced with algorithms, data structures, and possibilities. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He had much to prove to the team, to Musk, and most of all to himself. But today, Thomas Miller had been given something far more valuable than money. He'd been given a chance to reclaim his life. Thomas stared at his computer screen, fingers flying across the keyboard as he refined his proposal. The office had mostly emptied hours ago, but he remained fueled by a mixture of determination and fear. One day. That's all Musk had given him to draft his solution, and Thomas was determined not to waste a single hour of this opportunity. Dr. Chen had stayed late too, her desk across from his. She worked quietly, occasionally glancing up to check on him. "You should get some rest," she finally said, breaking the silence. "It's almost midnight." Thomas rubbed his eyes. "I'm almost done with the initial framework. Just need to run a few more simulations." Dr. Chen closed her laptop and walked over to his desk. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his screen. Thomas nodded, suddenly nervous. Dr. Chen leaned in, scanning his work with practiced eyes. Her expression remained neutral, but Thomas could sense her assessment. "Your approach is unorthodox," she said finally. Thomas's heart sank. "Is that a problem?" To his surprise, a small smile appeared on her face. "Not necessarily. Sometimes unorthodox is exactly what we need." She pointed to a section of his code. "This part here, using nested decision trees instead of our standard neural network approach. Why did you choose that?" "Neural networks are powerful but can be black boxes," Thomas explained. "For predictive maintenance, interpretability is as important as accuracy. When a system flags a potential failure, engineers need to understand why." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Most programmers get caught up in the elegance of deep learning. They forget that the end users are human beings who need to trust the system." She straightened up. "I think Mr. Musk will find this interesting." Relief flooded through Thomas. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied, gathering her things. "The real test comes tomorrow. Get some sleep, Thomas. The car service will pick you up at 7:30. As Dr. Chen left, Thomas sat back in his chair, letting the events of the day wash over him. 24 hours ago, he had been sleeping in a doorway. Now he had a desk, a purpose, and a chance to prove his worth. He glanced at his phone, the company-issued smartphone that felt foreign in his hand. The viral video of his encounter with Musk had exploded, now at over 3 million views. News outlets had picked up the story. Homeless engineer and Musk's second chance were trending. Thomas scrolled through some of the comments, feelings mixed. This is just a PR stunt. How long before they drop him? Respect to Elon for seeing potential where others saw just another homeless guy. I'm crying watching this. Second chances do exist. What about all the other homeless people? They deserve help too. The last comment struck a chord. Thomas was grateful for his opportunity, but he couldn't help thinking about the others he'd met on the streets. The veteran with PTSD, the young woman fleeing domestic violence, the elderly man whose medical bills had bankrupted him. They were all deserving of second chances too. With that sobering thought, Thomas finally headed back to his temporary apartment, set his alarm, and fell into the deepest sleep he'd had in months. Morning came too quickly. After a quick shower and breakfast, Thomas found himself back at the office, his proposal finalized and his nerves on edge. The meeting room was packed, more people than yesterday, including several executives he didn't recognize. Musk arrived last, coffee in hand, scrolling through something on his phone. "Let's make this quick," he said, taking a seat. "Thomas, you're up." Thomas connected his laptop to the projector, took a deep breath, and began. The current system monitors hydraulic pressure at regular intervals, looking for anomalies that might indicate potential failures, he explained, his voice steadier than he expected. "My approach reimagines when and how we collect and process that data." For the next 15 minutes, Thomas walked through his proposal, explaining the technical aspects in clear terms while highlighting the business benefits. As he spoke, he felt a familiar confidence returning, the voice of Thomas the engineer gradually drowning out Thomas the homeless man. When he finished, the room was silent. Musk studied the final slide, his expression unreadable. "Questions?" Musk asked the room. A man in the back raised his hand. "Implementation timeline. 3 weeks for a prototype, another month for full deployment," Thomas answered. "Cost analysis?" someone else asked. Thomas pulled up another slide. "Initial investment is higher due to the sensor upgrades, but the ROI is approximately 4.2 times greater over a 5-year period due to reduced downtime and maintenance costs." More questions followed, some technical, others skeptical. Thomas answered each one, occasionally deferring to Dr. Chen when questions veered into areas specific to the company's existing infrastructure. Finally, Musk raised his hand, silencing the room. "I've seen enough." He turned to Thomas. "It's not perfect. There are assumptions that need validation, and integration challenges you haven't fully addressed." Thomas's hope began to deflate. "But," Musk continued, "the core approach is solid. More importantly, it's innovative. I'm approving a pilot project." He looked around the room. "Dr. Chen will lead. Thomas will be her technical architect. You have 4 weeks." The meeting dispersed, leaving Thomas momentarily stunned. Dr. Chen approached, a small smile on her face. "Congratulations. Now the real work begins." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of coding, testing, and refinement. Thomas threw himself into the work, arriving early and staying late. His temporary apartment remained barely lived in, just a place to shower and sleep. The work consumed him, but in the best possible way. It was redemption, purpose, and passion rolled into one. Not everything went smoothly. Integration with existing systems proved more challenging than anticipated. Some team members remained skeptical, creating subtle roadblocks. Thomas struggled with imposter syndrome, certain that at any moment someone would realize he didn't belong. But there were victories too. The first successful test of the prototype, the grudging respect he began to earn from colleagues. The moment Dr. Chen stopped checking his work and started asking for his input on her own projects. Throughout it all, Thomas's story continued to spread. The media wanted interviews, which the company's PR team politely declined on his behalf. "Focus on the work first," they advised. "The story will wait." But even without interviews, Thomas's impact grew. One morning he arrived to find Lisa, Musk's assistant, waiting for him. "Mr. Musk would like to see you," she said, leading him to a small conference room. Inside, Musk sat with 2 people Thomas didn't recognize, a woman in a crisp suit and a man with a tablet filled with charts. "Thomas, meet Patricia from HR and David from our foundation," Musk said without preamble. "Your viral moment has created an opportunity, and I don't believe in wasting those." Thomas took a seat, confused. "Since your video went viral, we've received over 400 applications from people with technical backgrounds who are currently homeless or in precarious housing situations," Patricia explained. "They're asking if we have a program like the one you're in. And we've had inquiries from 23 companies wanting to know how they can create similar initiatives," David added. Thomas's mind reeled. "I had no idea." "Neither did we," Musk said. "But it's made us realize that the pilot program we've been considering needs to be accelerated." He leaned forward. "We're formalizing the Second Chance initiative. Job training, temporary housing, and employment opportunities for skilled people who've fallen through society's cracks. And we'd like you to help shape it," Patricia said, "not just as a participant but as an advisor. Your perspective would be invaluable." Thomas sat back, stunned. When he'd asked for that $1, he'd been hoping for bus fare to a workshop. Now he was being asked to help create a program that could change hundreds of lives. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Musk replied simply. "Keep working on the hydraulic project with Dr. Chen. That's still your primary responsibility." but set aside a few hours each week for this too. He stood, signaling the meeting was ending. Sometimes, Thomas, asking for a small thing leads to creating something much bigger. As Thomas walked back to his desk, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a photo of a familiar street corner, his old spot outside the coffee shop. The message read, "We miss you, but we're proud. Keep going. Your street family." Thomas stopped in the middle of the hallway, tears blurring his vision. In gaining his second chance, he hadn't just changed his own life. He'd created ripples that were spreading far beyond what he could have imagined. And somewhere in those ripples lay the beginnings of something transformative. Not just for him, but for others who only needed a chance to show their worth. 6 months later, Thomas stood at the podium, looking out at the crowded auditorium. His palms were sweaty, but his voice remained steady as he concluded his presentation. And that's how our predictive maintenance system has reduced factory downtime by 63% in the first quarter of implementation, he said, highlighting the final slide. The return on investment has already exceeded our initial projections by 40%, with further improvements expected as we refine the algorithms. Applause filled the room. In the front row, Dr. Chen gave him a subtle thumbs up. Beside her, Elon Musk nodded with satisfaction, already typing something on his phone. So much had changed in 6 months. The hydraulic monitoring system Thomas had proposed had moved from pilot to full implementation, saving the company millions in prevented failures and maintenance costs. His temporary position had become permanent, with a salary that still sometimes made Thomas do a double-take when he saw it in his bank account. He had moved out of the temporary housing into a modest one-bedroom apartment of his own. Nothing fancy, but it was his, paid for with his own earnings. On the wall hung a framed dollar bill, a reminder of where this journey had begun. As the crowd dispersed for the reception that followed, Thomas found himself surrounded by congratulations from colleagues who had once regarded him with suspicion. They were his team now, people he worked with daily, solving problems and creating solutions. "Quite a journey from that sidewalk," came a familiar voice. Thomas turned to find Musk standing behind him, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. He offered one to Thomas. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Thomas admitted, accepting the drink. "Thank you, not just for the opportunity, but for seeing me as something more than my circumstances." Musk shrugged. "I've always believed talent can be found anywhere. Society just gets lazy about looking." He gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. "Walk with me. There's something we need to discuss." Thomas followed, a brief flicker of anxiety rising in his chest. Old habits died hard, and part of him still expected this dream to evaporate at any moment. "The Second Chance Initiative," Musk said once they were away from the crowd. "How many participants now?" 43, Thomas replied, his anxiety fading. This was familiar territory now, spread across 4 departments. Retention rate is 89%, which exceeds typical new hire averages. And the expansion to other companies? 17 firms have adopted our framework. They've placed over 100 people so far. The nonprofit partners handling the housing component are stretched thin, but we're scaling that side too. Musk nodded, processing the information. Good, but not enough. We need to think bigger. This was classic Musk, always pushing boundaries, always seeking the next level. Thomas had learned to expect it. "The problem isn't just about homelessness," Musk continued. "It's about wasted potential. People with skills and knowledge who end up sidelined because of one bad break, one health crisis, one wrong turn." He fixed Thomas with his intense gaze. "We need to create a pathway that's accessible to more people." "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked. "A dedicated academy. Training facilities with housing attached, not just for the already skilled who've fallen on hard times, but for anyone with the aptitude and drive. Full scholarships for those who can't afford it." Thomas considered the idea. "That's ambitious." Musk gave him a look that clearly said, "When am I not?" "It would require significant investment," Thomas added. "Money isn't the issue. Structure, curriculum, finding the right people to run it. Those are the challenges. And that's where you come in." Thomas blinked. "Me? I want you to head up the planning committee. You've lived both sides of this equation, success, failure, and redemption. That gives you perspective no one else has." Before Thomas could respond, they were interrupted by a young woman approaching with purpose in her step. Thomas recognized her as Kate, one of the newer second chance participants who had been living in her car before joining the program 2 months ago. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Kate said, "but they're ready for the group photo of the original team." "Go ahead," Musk told Thomas. "Think about what I said. We'll talk more tomorrow." As Thomas followed Kate back to the main group, she whispered, "Was that about the academy?" "The rumor's been circulating all week," Thomas smiled. "News travels fast, so it's real?" Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Potentially," Thomas hedged. "Still in the planning phase," Kate nodded. "Well, just so you know, there are at least a dozen of us who would volunteer to help build it. Literally, with hammers and nails if necessary." This was what moved Thomas the most. The community that had formed among the second chance participants. They supported each other, celebrated each other's victories, helped each other through setbacks. They were building something together that was larger than any individual success story. The group photo was taken, speeches were made, and the evening wound down. As Thomas prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a notification from the Second Chance community app they'd developed. It was a success story. A former participant had just received a promotion at one of the partner companies. The comments section was filled with congratulations and support. Thomas added his own, feeling the now familiar warmth of witnessing another life turning around. On his way home, Thomas made a detour. He drove to the coffee shop where it had all begun, parked across the street, and sat looking at the spot where he had once stood with his worn backpack and dog-eared book. The spot wasn't empty now. A young man sat there, cardboard sign beside him, shoulders hunched against the evening chill. Without hesitation, Thomas got out of his car and crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said, approaching slowly so as not to startle the man. The young man looked up warily. Thomas recognized that wariness, the constant calculation of whether an interaction meant help or harm. "I don't want any trouble," the young man said. "No trouble," Thomas assured him. "I just wanted to give you this." He held out a card, not money but information about the Second Chance Initiative's upcoming recruitment event. The young man took it cautiously. "What is this?" "A possibility," Thomas said simply. "If you're interested, come to that address on Thursday. Bring your skills, whatever they are. We'll provide the rest." The young man studied the card. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas smiled. "Because someone once gave me a chance when all I asked for was $1. Walking back to his car, Thomas felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with his desperate request 6 months ago was now extending outward, creating new beginnings for others. Later that night, in his apartment, Thomas opened his laptop and began to type. Musk wanted ideas for the academy by their meeting tomorrow, and Thomas's mind was already buzzing with possibilities. As he worked, a notification popped up, an email from a reporter requesting an interview about the Second Chance Initiative. Thomas had done a few of these now, carefully telling his story in hopes of inspiring other companies to create similar programs. The reporter's final question caught his eye. "Looking back, what would you say to the person you were that day on the sidewalk?" Thomas sat back considering. What would he say to that desperate man who had summoned the courage to ask for a single dollar? He began to type his answer. I would tell him that his worth was never determined by his circumstances. That the skills and knowledge he'd built over years didn't disappear when his address did. That rock bottom isn't a place to stay. It's a foundation to build upon. And most importantly, I'd tell him that sometimes the smallest requests can open the largest doors. If you're asking the right person at the right moment. Thomas paused, then added one final line. And I'd remind him that while the world often measures success in dollars, the most valuable currency is always opportunity. He sent the email, closed his laptop, and looked at the framed dollar bill on his wall. From a single dollar to a life transformed. From one man's chance to a movement. Sometimes the smallest things made the biggest difference.